Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 43 of Level Up, 60 minutes of live Q&A where your questions and votes really do drive the show. Please do use the Slido link that we're going to pop into the chat to vote up the questions that you would most like answered, and of course to add your own and put those straight to the panel. Level Up is live now 2 days a week, Mondays at 8 a.m. and Fridays at 2 p.m., both UK time zone. And we live stream, of course, to YouTube and to LinkedIn now. Across the series of episodes, we've just passed 25,000 views online. So thank you very much to our producers. That's yourselves, the audience who are watching. Thank you very much indeed. We've answered well over 500 questions, and you can find all of those questions and the answers that go with them by visiting our website, apmginternational.com. And we'll put a little link in the chat as well to that for you. The whole show is driven by you. So get those questions in and vote up the ones that you want to see answered by the panel. Our panel for today is an amazing group of people gathered from all around the world. So we're going to jump straight in and meet them. Farah Heba is a product owner. She's joining us for the first time today. She's a trainer at Arva, and she has a passion for knowledge sharing. She's got amazing skills in digital project and product management, and enjoys engaging with truly multicultural teams around the world. So welcome, Farah. Great to meet you and great to have you on Level Up.
Thank you, Nick. I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Also joining Farah for her second appearance on Level Up is Malini Jayaganesh. She's a highly experienced business relationship manager, and she's actually a director emeritus of the BRM Institute. Malini is a very creative communicator, I have to say, whose articles on LinkedIn include one entitled "Begin Your Day with a Tomato." So thank you very much indeed for joining us again, Malini. Great to have you on the panel.
Thank you very much for having me here again, and greetings to everyone who's watching from Melbourne, Australia.
Okay, thank you very much. And extra points awarded because at the time of recording, actually, it's pretty late in Melbourne and it's gently in the afternoon in the UK. So we feel very privileged. Thank you very much indeed. Johann Botha returns to the panel again today. He is the CEO, of course, over at getITright in South Africa. He's also the architect of the Agile Adapt method, and you can find out a lot more about that on any of his regular live streams, really. So do connect with him on LinkedIn, and then you'll pick up where he broadcasts those. Welcome back, Johann.
Thank you, Nick. Delighted to be here, and thank you to everybody listening and sending in questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Back for, I think, his second appearance is Holger Heuss. He's the director at Pendraig Consulting. He's an accomplished author and project director, and he's led global transformation programs and multinational and complicated organizations. So welcome back, Holger.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody from London. Delighted to be back, and I'm looking forward to an engaged conversation for the next hour, built on the questions that have been arriving.
Thank you very much indeed. David McCreery is joining us from Ireland, from Dublin in Ireland today. He's a consultant at Althris, where he works with clients throughout Europe, the Middle East and Africa as a practitioner, coach and mentor to project managers and project sponsors. Welcome, David.
Hi, Nick. Thanks very much. And looking forward to this. Looking forward to a few challenging questions already. So let's should be good.
Okay, very good. So warm welcome to all of our panelists. And if you're watching and you feel that you would like to be able to join in and just volunteer in the chat, and we'll be in touch with you and welcome you onto the panel for a future event. Our question master for today is Charlotte Miller, and she joined us from the Thames Valley here in the UK. So welcome, Charlotte. May we have our first question, please?
Nick, you may. We have a question from Pat Sheehan. How does Agile Change differ from what we've looked at in the past?
David, start us off on this, and then Farah.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of different angles to this, but I think one of the key angles is that in Agile Change, we're expecting a huge volume of multiple and many changes all the time. So traditionally, you might have seen as one well-centered change across the organization. In Agile Change, we're kind of seeing it as more common, more often, more regular, repeated, small changes. I think that's probably the key kind of difference, that we're going to go through a rhythm of changes, not just one big bang approach to change. I think that's the key thing about Agile Change.
Okay, thank you, Farah, and then Johann.
I totally agree with you, David. And I would add that the second, let's say, difference is in regards to users' adoption of changes. Being in a faster pace, changes will occur more frequently, as you have said, and it needs to be smooth for users. So change team should focus on key changes activities that add the most values. Also, changes should be designed to be adopted in a minimally supported way, and change team should be able to point out moments when users are, let's say, not ready to receive the change, or they're with their more convenience for them, and when there is a risk of low customer adoption. So it's a kind of a second perspective to consider when dealing with change.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting. Let's then go to Johann, please, and then Holger.
So I think the most important thing that we need to consider is that there is or should be a fundamental rethink about the way that the organization thinks and behaves. So this is not about managing change in the traditional sense. This is actually changing culture in the organization.
Thank you very much indeed. Holger, would you agree?
Yeah, I probably wanted to put a slightly different view on it, and it's why we're actually having Agile Change. And for me, that's in response to another concept. It's called VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And if you look at those four different factors, they are, compared to the past, much more volatile across the piece, and that's the response to it. So, our environment has changed, as have we as human beings. Technology has changed, and it's all exponential, and we need to be able to respond to that in an agile fashion in order to be still competitive as an organization in the marketplace, for example.
Yeah, you raise a really, really good point now, because that degree of volatility, I think, does act as a catalyst to the way in which organizations are, needing to embrace different ways of working, and that ultimately manifests itself in behaviors, and therefore cultural change as an organization begins to transform. So really great question. Thank you very, very much indeed, panel, for getting us underway today. Charlotte, if we can, we'll move on. We'll take our next question, please.
Thanks, Nick. We've got a question from Alice in Singapore. Do you have suggestions for dealing with resistance to change?
Thank you very much, Farah, and then Malini.
Well, what I would say is that first you'll need to understand the root cause. Why do people resist? Change can be really scary, and many of us like to hold on to a sense of safety and security. So in agile environments, the first thing to do is really to listen, and point out what's the root cause of that resistance. Then you could put into practice some, let's say, basic elements. You can find your champions, your change ambassadors, or just simply offer choices so that it will put the ownership and control back into the hands of people.
Thank you very much. Malini, what are your thoughts?
I agree with what Farah has just said, and what I would add on to that is, I think, when we make that attempt to understand, we should come from a position of empathy and compassion. So we should be prepared to challenge our own assumptions and be very non-judgmental. And I think that's really important to gain the trust of the people that we are working with. And you might find that when you take an empathetic and a compassionate view, that they would actually be a little bit more open to listening to the messages that you might have for them.
Absolutely right. And thank you very much indeed, Malini. Holger, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I just probably adding to the commentary that has been already provided. I think pointing out the key change, it is going to be in bite-sized chunks. It's not going to be a big bang change anymore. So pointing out the benefits of providing a change in a more agile fashion, little waves of change coming and being digestible, rather than a big bang approach.
I think you're right there. With the one thing that I would say within an agile environment is that sometimes one of our personal tendencies may be to extrapolate beyond what is known, because nobody really likes uncertainty. Well, as human beings, we quite like permanency, really. We like to know that things are going to be largely, similar tomorrow than they are today. And so what can tend to happen is that folks can try and extrapolate way beyond, this next incremental part of an agile change cycle and form conclusions which, quite frankly, are not going to materialize. So it's a good thing to be aware of that and just kind of, as Malini says, try and tune in. And to Farah's point, try and think about, how people are feeling about this and tease that out a little bit so that you can help, kind of guide them along the way and be there to support them. Very good. Thank you very much indeed, panel. Let's move on, Charlotte, please, if we can, and take our next question.
We've got a question from Martin. What are the most common obstacles when applying change management in an agile environment?
Okay, common obstacles. Let's go to Johann first. Thank you very much. And then we'll go to David.
Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of a monologue. I find it extremely strange when leaders tell their team, we need to be agile. But as a result, they're not willing to change anything else in the organization. Control stays the same. The metric stays the same. The rule stays the same. Their behavior stays the same. But yet they're expecting a different outcome. And I think that we, to a large extent, overlook some of these organizational factors to make sure that agile actually works. We need to measure differently. We need to manage differently. We need to build trust. We need to evolve power. There's just so many things that needs to happen. That's nothing to do with agile itself as such.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Holger and then David.
Yeah, probably just echoing.
Go ahead, Holger.
It's down to the leadership, typically. The ways of thinking and the behaviors of the leadership have to change. The level of control versus the level of trust applied. And we talked about in the previous question already quite extensively about trust. That's the key item here. You need to apply trust and make sure you delegate the decision-making down to the levels where it is required and don't hold on to that and become, as it is called, typically a servant leader rather than anything else, rather than a controlling leader.
Thank you. We may come back to that concept of servant leadership in a little while. David, your thoughts on this, please.
Yeah, my thoughts are really that the biggest obstacle is the cultural change. And I think that's probably the single biggest obstacle. And maybe I think it echoes what the other guys were saying there as well. It is about, is the organization and the culture of the organization able to take on the agile change? If the organization hasn't built up a culture where we can delegate down and we can use everybody in the organization to be the change, not just from the top down, I think that's the single biggest culture. If we're going to try and make a rapid, continuous change, everybody needs to be part of that change. And we need to switch that culture from a top down so that everybody's involved in it. I think that's, in my mind, is probably the single biggest obstacle to agile change.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I do want to explore culture a little bit more in a moment. Malini, go ahead.
I agree with what has been said about leadership. I think one of the obstacles in my experience has also been the willingness of the people involved to progress change when they don't know everything about the situation. So what I mean by that is people who have an attitude of perfectionism, and you need to have everything worked out up front. Agile is very different. With Agile, you actually build the bridge as you walk on it, almost, and you have to be really comfortable with that degree of uncertainty or lack of completeness.
Thank you very much. Farah?
Thank you, Nick. What I would add is simply also that we would need to define new boundaries in regards to roles and responsibilities. When it comes to agile transformation or any new change that would happen into an organization, sometimes people are just scared. What would be my new activities? Where do I fit? So it might be something also interesting to go through, because in my experience and from the ground, I see that it's the major obstacle that might be encountered by new team that are going into Agile. Because people have a lot, let's say, of ideas about Agile. They know things, they read things, etc. And sometimes they just mix up what they can do, what will be the changes, what would be the impacts on their responsibilities. So just to add it to what has been said already by the panelists, I think that the roles and responsibilities, and especially the boundaries, would be interesting to tackle.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think in a cultural context, one of the obstacles about getting change locked in, right, is the latency between having the thought of embracing change and that thought manifesting itself in a different set of observed behaviors in an organization. And it's one thing to, as a leader, to inspire others, to set out a very clear vision, perhaps, even to come up with a brilliant strategy for how the organization may, approach to realize that vision. But it's quite another to live that change and to get that change embedded into a new set of behaviors, so that all individual contributors, all teams, all functional areas, all of your ecosystem, if you like, is actually living and breathing and exhibiting that change. Holger, your reflection on that, please.
Yeah, I think two topics come to mind for me. First, it's making sure everybody across the organization understands the strategic direction, where we're heading as an organization at all levels, top to bottom, and is aligned to that and agrees as far as agreement is required. It's required for that. And the second point, it's all well and good to have new processes, new roles, responsibilities. The one thing that gets people really moving ultimately is performance measures and incentives to change behaviors and move towards a new target state. Absolutely fundamental, and that goes across any change you implement. What's in it for me? What do I gain if I behave in a certain way going forward? And we started talking about leaders. They will lose some kind of control. As long as the compensation, I suspect, is still the same, they should be okay with that. If that's not the case anymore, if your compensation, for example, is measured by span of control, you are going to have difficulties explaining a concept where delegation is a must.
Okay, thank you, Johann, and then David.
I think Holger touched on or mentioned a word that's important. Agile is a strategic decision, and it needs to be reflected in the way that you put your organization together. Once again, he highlighted this issue of metrics, measurement. Peter Drucker said that what gets measured gets done. I don't know if it's always true, but it is largely true. So if you expect people to behave differently, but you still measure them in the old way, guess what you're going to get? The old behavior. So it's really pretty key that role or that distinction needs to be made.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Final thoughts?
One of the things that I think is important is, as well as, it's a bit about, it's about leadership, but it's also about the culture of leadership. What we really need to do is also enable everybody in the organization to be able to take little steps of leadership themselves, where everybody feels that they can actually suggest change, make change, and take on some leadership. So leadership is not just coming from the top down, but that actually anybody in the organization can actually spot something and say, you know what, this would be useful. This is something that I think we can change. I think that's really key to having an agile culture in the organization, that everybody feels part of the change as well.
Yeah, you're so right, and that's why, classically that agile, org chart is so incredibly flat. For a very good reason. That we do need to kind of own these things and provide leadership in our own context, our own situation. Very good. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Great question, by the way. Thank you very much indeed, Martin. That was fantastic. Really got everybody thinking. Let's move on. Thank you, Charlotte. Next question.
A question from Celia B. Do you have suggestions for spreading a culture of agile change within remote teams?
So this goes to the earlier point, really, doesn't it, about that situational leadership? How would you help enable the spread of culture of agile change with workers who are remote from you? Farah, start us off, and then Malini.
Well, I would say that things have changed tremendously during the past 2 years. So people are more and more engaged into remote teams, into a kind of new way of working, I would say. There are still ways to spread the agile change culture even in this kind of environment. Well, first, you would need to invest in communication and collaboration tool that would enable your teams to interact seamlessly so that they will feel that they are all together, even if they are in two parts of the world. You can organize also some remote workshops so that your team can build a common change management approach, for example, frequency of change, defining the right moments for change, trainings, etc. And you can, for example, share also what you expect from people. What are the new ground rules so that everybody knows exactly what we wait from them. What are the new, let's say, rules for the game?
Thank you very much, Malini.
I think Celia has asked a really fantastic question there. And adding on to what Farah has said, one of the things that I think is really critical is, with an agile culture, or central to agile culture is the concept of distributed leadership, which means that if we want people, at all levels of the organization to be able to have a voice and determine what changes will be made, I think we also need to ensure that they have been given the proper context, whether it's the strategic context or any other information that they need, so that they're equipped and empowered to make some decisions themselves. That actually can be a bit challenging in a remote environment. When you're all physically in one place, you can actually have coffee cooler, water cooler conversations, or coffee chats and so on. It becomes so much more difficult in a remote environment, and that's something I think we need to watch out for and make sure that we create opportunities for conversation to communicate the broader context.
I absolutely agree with that. Thank you very much, David, and then Holger.
I just have to more or less back up what Malina just said. I think that's probably my point is similar in that if we have got remote teams, we need to make sure that they feel like they've been enabled to contribute to the change. And in order to do that, we need to capture their feedback, we need to involve them, and we need to set up those mechanisms where they feel like they can give feedback and they can contribute to the change. So really, I suppose just backing up what Malina said, making sure that they are properly connected to the change is important.
Thank you very much indeed. Holger?
And this is just a reflection on a big program I just finished, working across the the globe, from India to Poland to the UK to the US, you need to take into account the culture of the teams in the various locations. So one of the topics, we actually figured out that there were different levels of resistance switching the cameras on, for example, letting people into their private space, or providing a private background or a video background. So understanding those cultural differences are actually paramount for the team members to understand why someone might not join online, or their private situation. We had people sitting in a room together with the whole family, joining and trying to keep the kids quiet. Why? Because of the COVID situation. So understanding those restrictions you have to work under, or simply the culture in a location, are paramount in order to get some coherence across the team, or at least an understanding why someone might not fall in line.
Yeah, you make a really, really good point, because none of us have the insight into other people's situation, how they are now during the pandemic. I thought it was quite fascinating, really, because people felt that somehow or another they needed to exclude family life from what was happening in the middle of a global pandemic. And it was quite fascinating. There were a couple of moments, weren't there, that went viral globally, I think, of young children interrupting subject matter experts on national television broadcasts. It didn't matter which country you were in. It kind of happened. But, everybody knew that we were in a pandemic at the time. So it's really quite interesting that somehow or another there was something inside of us that wanted to separate home and work, at that moment, despite it was evident, self-evident, that we were talking to people in their living room, or in their study, or in even their guest bedroom, from time to time, and so on. So thank you very much indeed, panel. Now then, if you're watching and you want to ask the panel a question, then please do just type us into the chat. We'll pick it up and we'll put it in front of the panel. Charlotte, let's take our next question, please.
On that, we have a question from Farah Heba, who's a live viewer. It's hard to use Agile for government contracts or fixed cost projects. I was trying that in KSA, but isn't much results. What's your opinion?
Thank you very much. Malini, get us underway on this one, please.
Okay, Faris, I understand exactly where you're coming from, because I have considerable experience with this. The thing to remember, though, is that with these fixed cost projects or contracts, traditionally what has been happening is quite a lot of time and effort is spent on trying to understand requirements completely. Then you start building, and by the time you deliver, because so much time has elapsed, it actually doesn't really meet the needs of the users, because the business is changing quite rapidly. So I think actually the agile approach is actually very suitable for these types of projects, because you can actually build in order to understand. So you can actually build a minimum viable product, and that's the best way to actually get a better understanding of user requirements. It actually helps you to manage the risks, of the project much better, deliver value early. So there are definitely a number of case studies where the agile approach has worked very successfully in government.
Okay, thank you very much. Holger?
Yeah, I'm just reading the question again and again, and it does say fixed cost, which for me is one of the fundamental concepts of agile delivery. I have a number of team members for a certain period of time dedicated to the project, or even if I don't call it project anymore, regardless what I call it. So that's for me the very nature of a fixed price contract. Now, in the past, when I looked at that, and that's 20 years ago when I was part of IBM Rational, fixed price contract in that concept, what has been advocated, and I think it's still relevant nowadays, is defining a contract for time and material at the beginning, at the outset, until you know what your delivery looks like. And that is in line with what Malini just said, with the minimum viable product. If you know your prototype or whatever it might look like, from then on, you can actually go fix cost. What we advocated at the time 20 years ago was going in two chunks. First, time and material, and then the second half as fixed cost. But if you truly believe in Agile, you go fixed price all in throughout, but the client needs to be bought in. I had one client in the past, they would not be able to do Agile. They needed requirements and requirements being signed off.
It is really, really important to, as the traditional saying in North America goes, you have to dance with the partner that you brought to the dance. Okay, so if your client is able to embrace some of the thinking, and you're in that pre-engagement phase where you're looking, to bid and so on, and you're putting forward your ideas, I think there's every opportunity for you to take them on, through the piece of work on a kind of a spectrum, if you like. Now, there's a gentleman called Adrian Dooley, who is the author of the Praxis Framework, and his argument about waterfall versus agile and this kind of thing is that it's a bit of a polarization for effect, and that actually you have a continuum of agility from some projects that really you do need a lot of certainty, and others where you have much more flexibility and much more degree of freedom. So it's just something to think about. Embrace that continuum concept rather than see it as an either or. Farah, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, just one last thought on this in regards to fixed price contracts. The idea is also to make sure that your service provider, if you work with an external company, understand the way you work. What does Agile means to you? What does it mean for requirements collection, for testing, for all what's related to your product management approach? So when they understand how you work, it will be more, let's say, easy for you to try to figure out a balance with them. Whether they want a fixed requirement or they accept some changes, maybe it's better for them to have like a log of all the changes to understand, to justify each one of them. But the idea is just to figure out how to find this balance, this consensus with your provider, and to let them know what are your ways of working, what does Agile means to you. Because in some cases, and I see it on the ground, Agile does not mean exactly the same for company A, company B, etc. So one of the keys, I think, and I have experienced this with fixed price contracts, is to make sure that your partner understands how you deal with the project and how you deal with the changes.
Very much indeed. Some great answers there, and really food for thought. What a brilliant question. Thank you very much, Faris. Really appreciate your question to be put to the panel. Charlotte, let's move on if we can, and we'll take the next question, please.
Nick, we've got a question from another live viewer, Jan von Bonn. I'd rather say that Agile is a tactical decision, not a strategic one. The organization's goals don't change, do they?
Okay, all right. Well, this is going to put the cat and the pigeons into the same kind of location. So we're going to go around and get a bit of thinking from the panel. Let's speak from the heart, please. David, start us off, then we'll go to Johann.
I'm a bit sort of confused by that question, to say that Agile is a tactical decision, not a strategic. I think Agile is extremely strategic. I think actually Agile is the way to bring strategy to life. Okay. Now you might sort of say that Agile is not taking the whole sort of long-term picture, but the Agile approach is to say we don't fully understand what the world is going to be like in 6 months or a year. We don't know how our product is going to cater to the marketplace in 6 months or a year. So you've made a strategic decision to change your approach, to say, we're going to react to the market as we go along. We're going to see the products that we can change and the products that we can share. So I think actually I'd say the opposite. I think Agile is a very strategic approach.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. It's good to have this debate and dialogue. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Jan, as well. So we're going to hear from Johann, and then we'll go to Holger.
I think the thing here is that if you think about Agile with a big A as a method, then you can argue it's tactical. But if you're really thinking about business agility, it means that you change the way you do business. Everything changes. The structure of your business changes. The way that you manage your business changes. The way that you approach customers change. And if that's not strategic, then I don't know.
Thank you very much indeed. And Holger?
Yeah, thanks, Johann. You almost stole everything I wanted to say. It depends whether we talk about agile, lowercase a, capital A, or agility. And there seems to be a lot of confusion around that, I think. For me, lowercase agile is actually not even tactical, it's operational. How I work and work in the context of delivery, whatever that might be. Agile, I would call it not a method, I would call it probably different frameworks or practices you might apply. And agility is what we're actually angling for. That's the outcome we want to have. And that, for me, is expressed in different ways. And it doesn't necessarily mean I have to have a wonderful Kanban board in front of me and have to put stickers on it. It's a mindset. And as we had it already quite a few times, it's a way of thinking and it's a way of behaving. And it's more a mindset kind of issue rather than anything else.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that you can evidence that in different ways. If you ask the question, what is agile, to an individual contributor who works, say, in a software development environment, they will give you one answer. If you ask a C-suite group of leaders, how would they describe agile? An agile organization, say, that might be a leading question to kind of put to them, then you'll get a very different kind of set of answers, because it is all based on our perception and whereabouts we are in an organization and what it is that we need to achieve. And certainly at a senior leadership level, that the desired state is for the whole organization to become more adept, more agile, to be more flexible, more responsive, more capable. Because, of course, the reality is in your career, as you move away from doing the coding, you're no longer hands-on making the changes. You're influencing somebody to make the change. And the further that you progress up the career structure to the C-suite, you're even more removed from it. So C-suite people, leaders like levers to pull and push and to get the organization to change and do different things quickly. And that's super important. And I would argue that there are two sides to this. There's that kind of sense of, all right, operationally, this is the way we're going to go. But strategically, actually, this may be the direction of travel, and both can coexist together. Thank you very much indeed. Great question, Jan. Thank you for putting it to the panel. Some lovely answers. Now we're going to move on and we're going to come back to, I think, culture in the organization. So, Charlotte, may we have the next question, please?
We've got a live question from Anthony Guthrie. What's the first thing that needs to be considered before implementing change?
All right. The very first thing, David?
Look, simply, it has to be people. We have to understand the people that the change is going to affect. We need to have an understanding of what their attitude to change is and what their capacity is to change. I think that's the first thing. So we can't go pushing change on people until we understand that. The second thing I'd sort of say is that we need to also understand where people can contribute to the change as well. That's probably the two things that I would see as kind of key, the key starting blocks before we implement change.
Thank you very much. Johann and then Farah. Johann, we can't hear you.
Sorry, it's raining and I muted my microphone. What got you here won't necessarily get you there. And the size of the gap between here and there also means that you need to carefully consider what are the steps that you're going to take to get it there. Because if you try and do everything at once, it's not very agile.
Thank you very much. Farah, your thoughts, please?
Yeah, I would add that you would need to understand how changes has been managed so far into the organization. What's the history? Do you have any feedback, any experience that you can gather from the ground and that would inspire you in choosing the different change methods that you would apply, or knowing what works with the people in there and what doesn't work? It will save you time, and at the same time, it will, let's say, give more trust into your method and into the way you're dealing with the change.
Really good point. Thank you. Holger?
The first thing that came to my mind was reflecting on the scope, i.e. where we're starting and what is the desired end state. Even if that is, as a solution space being defined, not very concrete, understanding those two and the gap between those before we actually go and figure out how that impacts possibly people.
Yeah, it's a good point that certainly when I read the question, I was kind of thinking about that sort of scope and scale. There's some really great guidance from a number of organizations. You might want to look at the guidance from the Change Management Institute. They've done some really great work about being able to identify what is, now these are my words now, transactional change versus transformational, say for instance, and therefore what kinds of tools and techniques might you wish to adopt in order to be able to deliver the right kind of outcome. Because some change actually is better handled slightly differently. And so you would choose the right tools, if you like, for the particular situation that you were in. So something around identifying that, what is the scope and scale first? You might want to think about alongside all of the other things that the panel have suggested. Thank you very much indeed, Anthony. Brilliant question. Let's move on, Charlotte, if we may.
Thanks, Nick. I think we've got a question from one of our panelists. Johann, what is the role of the organizational's leadership in ensuring agile mindsets?
All right, so the role of leadership in ensuring, guaranteeing, underwriting, making self-evident that this is all going to happen. That's a big one. What's our role in all of that? Malini, start us off, then we'll hear from Holger.
Well, I think we can take a cue from the word leadership and say that the organization's leadership needs to lead the way by demonstrating the behaviors that the agile, demonstrating the agile mindset in their behaviors. They have to walk the talk.
Thank you very much indeed. I completely agree with that. Holger and then Farah.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Walk the walk and talk the talk. Simple as that. If you're not doing it, nobody else is.
They're not going to do it. That's the whole point about leadership, being out in front so that people can follow you. Excellent. Good point, Farah.
I will just add two things. I would say, of course, as the other panelists said, apply the agile way of working and not just paying lip service. And at the same time, be clear on what the organization needs to do. So share clear intentions and seek for feedback. Because you're the leader, people should trust you. You are the one that's providing the direction, that's helping people into getting into this new culture. So if you apply things, if you apply the agile ways of working, well, it will be better. And it's one of your roles also to be the role model. But at the same time, please, let's say, listen to others and give and receive feedbacks on this.
Yeah, such an important part, that giving and receiving feedback and actually acting on that feedback as well, because you don't want to be too dogmatic as a leader. Setting a direction is one thing. Charting the course is quite another, when the wind and the tide and the waves are blowing you in different directions. Johann, you raised the question, my friend, so I thought that we better come back to you for your final thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think that the panel handled the question well. Maybe one thing I can add, this issue of trust. Agile works well in a high trust environment. And it's really difficult for people to, even though they may be excited enthusiastic about making the changes and doing work differently, in feeling safe enough to actually take responsibility and accountability for things that needs to happen if we devolve decision making down and making more agile, smaller changes.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, panel. Great question there. And it really got us thinking about, how do you exhibit the attributes of that servant leader, of the listening leader, of the person who is enabling others in order to be able to succeed? Very good. Charlotte, let's take our next question, please.
Thanks, Nick. We've got a question from Sharon in Yorkshire. How could you measure the benefits of building a culture of agile change?
Right. Now, sometimes the presence of something is tricky to be able to measure in the early days, but the absence of something is easier to detect early on. So some of the reasons why you want to move away from your present culture into a more agile culture, it's easier sometimes if you start looking at the disbenefits of the current situation, measure those and watch if they are decaying. David, what are your thoughts about measurement of benefits in change environments?
Yeah, and I'm not certain on the measurements, but one of the things we need, and one of the key benefits, is to increase our capacity to change. So one of the things we could look to is figure out, how can we spot what our current capacity to change is at the moment, and perhaps benchmark that and say, right, at the moment, we actually find it very difficult to change our way of doing things. And in 6 months' time, we will have a capacity to be able to enable changes. And that's probably the simplest measure that we could put down for building a change culture. It's to build in a capacity to do it.
Thank you, Johann, and then Holger.
Just bear in mind, this doesn't happen overnight. So don't get disheartened if you measure it this month and next month and nothing has changed. Most probably you won't see a big movement. But for me, the best way of actually checking whether we're doing things better is to speak to our customers and the experiences that they have when we start doing things differently and actually listening better.
Thank you very much, Holger.
I would apply, as always, a concept from the past because they're there, and why shouldn't we use them? So the question reminded me immediately of the balanced scorecard. Looking at those four different dimensions, looking after the customers, as we have said already, looking after the financials, what does it do to the bottom line? How lean are our processes? And last but not least, how are our people affected by it? And then using in all four quadrants different measures, for example, on people, the rate of attrition and retention and so forth. So I would go very traditional there. It doesn't mean we have to reinvent everything new just because we say we're trying to be on a journey to agile.
You're absolutely right. Thank you very much indeed. Great question. Charlotte, let's move on if we can. We'll take our next one. I think we've got time perhaps for 2 or 3 more questions before we're done.
Nick, we've got a live question from Batia P. Are there any measures or metrics that indicate an organization's level of agility?
There are indeed, and there's a whole variety of different ways to be able to look at that depending on the nature of the organization and the industry that you're in. But one of them I would suggest is your time scale to be able to go from ideation into an incremental deliverable. So what might that mean? It may mean from a customer service perspective that you're able to evaluate and change how you're engaging with customers, and just look at that life cycle and see, can you shorten that, and is the change actually having a material beneficial effect? Malini, we'll come to you next, and then we'll go to Johann.
I think, Nick, one of the things that that you see with organizations that have a higher level of maturity, in terms of their agility, is they have a healthier appetite for failure, right? And that's often something that doesn't get measured, but I think it should. So are you actually, able to fail fast and learn from it? That's actually a really good indicator of the level of agility, one of the measures.
Thank you very much, Johann, and then Farah.
I'm glad Holger actually used the balanced scorecard because there's one thing that's really important actually when you start working in an agile way is that quite often your financial metrics opposes this new behavior. And people found out when they started doing lean, they had exactly the same problem. So go and scratch around and understand lean accounting a little bit also, because there we measure different things from a financial perspective. And I think that's very important.
Thank you very much, Farah, and then David.
Yeah, I will add something. Usually when you speak about agility, the first thing that you do is that you go through the Agile Manifesto to try to figure out what are the 4 values, what are the 12 principles. And I think that this tool is really powerful because through the 12 principles, you can build your own, I would say, agility maturity scale. And you can answer some question, put a scoring in front of it, and then at the end, know what's the current level of, let's say, your maturity in terms of agile and what will be your target. And then you can follow up this throughout your agile transformation. So it's, let's say, a basic things. Usually everyone knows what's exactly the Agile Manifesto, but few people use it as a diagnosis base or an assessment base. And I think it might be interesting for people that want to figure out their level of maturity and to follow it up and to make, let's say, a monitoring tool.
That's a really great idea. Thank you, Farah. I think there's a retirement plan actually in that one. What a brilliant idea. Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on. We'll hear from David and then Holger.
Yeah, I think the simplest agile metric to use, and I'd go as far as the only one that I'd be very comfortable with, is value stream analysis. I think that's a very simple, straightforward technique. It obviously comes from lean, but it applies to agile very well, which, it really boils down to how long does it take us to get from the input to the output? And that's really the key measure that we can use in agile. How long does it take us for the requirement to get that requirement from capture to actually delivered? And I don't think that's any different with change. When we spot a potential change, how long does it take us to get from that potential, from spotting the potential change to implementing it? I'd certainly use a very straightforward value stream analysis, which is from lean, but very easy to implement for running agile.
Thank you very much indeed. Holger, final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I would go to the frameworks that are readily available in the marketplace. They all have, in my eyes, an endless list of measures and metrics you can apply. My warning comes with, look at those metrics and measures in very much detail and understand which of them are quantitative versus those which are qualitative. I found that 90% of those measure something that hasn't been measured before, and why should it be measured now? I don't understand that quite. For me, it's the quality, and that reflects on what David has said. For example, with the value stream analysis, how long does it take from taking a customer request in and deliver back to the market? And what are the bottlenecks in between? That has nothing to do with agile. It's a lean concept, but they go hand in hand. So making sure we look at the right measures and metrics rather than we built 5 user stories last month. Doesn't mean anything to anybody. Doesn't give me any value indication.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much indeed. We could just fit in one last question if we're super quick. Charlotte, go ahead.
Question from Noah in Texas. How do I ensure that my customers are also ready for the organization to become agile?
Okay, well, one of the things that you can probably be aware of is your customers may be ahead of you. Really quickly, Johann, please.
So just bear in mind, if you're talking about your organization, you can engage and you can explain and you can take them on the journey. If you're talking about their organization, you can't. It's their decision.
Thank you very much, David.
I look, this is a challenge that I've come across where the one I'm thinking about is an insurance company who's moving to an agile approach. And how do we get our customers to understand that we're going to adapt the product over time, not in one big bang? I think it's very, very difficult. But what you really need to do is bring them on the journey with you. And you need to actually sell the concept to them so that they're bought into it. If you can't sell the concept to them, well, they're not going to be. They're not necessarily going to be with you. So they need to see what their benefits are for you moving to Agile.
Thank you very much. Final thoughts on this, please, Holger?
Yeah, besides echoing what David just said, the question I have, why? Can you not operate anymore in another fashion that is actually conducive for the customer? The dog and the tail concept comes to mind. You need to follow your client. I have experienced that, first asking for Agile and then saying, sorry, we're not comfortable. Can we go back to a more traditional approach? And we had to accommodate that. Otherwise, take them on the journey, but you're not getting paid for it, probably, on this occasion.
Thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate everybody's thoughts there. Well, wow, what a fantastic set of questions that we've had today, all around the culture of agility and how we build it in organizations. So let's hear from our panel, your closing remarks, if we may. Farah, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Holger.
Okay. I think that was an amazing panel. There has been a lot of questions that are really interesting. And my final thought would be to say that there is no magic wand when it comes to agile change or any agile transformation, and that you would need to understand that there is, let's say, a big basket of tools, techniques, approaches in which you need to dig into and try to figure out what's the best for you. And the best thing to do is just to test and learn.
Thank you very much indeed, Holger, and then Johann.
Yeah, very interesting hour. Absolutely enjoyed it. So thank you very much for the questions and for all the responses. What I take away between Agile lowercase, Agile uppercase, and agility, we had 6 people speaking today. I think we had at least 7 opinions, what the definition is for all those 3 terms. And that's just a reflection on where this is coming from and where it might be going. So we constantly have to be agile to be afoot with the changes that are happening in this space.
Thank you very much indeed. Some really great points, Johann, and then Malini.
First of all, thanks to the panel. It was great. I learned a lot. And since I ended last time with a quote, I'll end this time with a quote again. Change is not mandatory, but neither is survival. That was getITright. That was Edward Deming, by the way.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much indeed. There's always a good takeaway from Johann every episode. Thank you very much. Malini and then David.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this very interesting panel. And also to everyone who sent through such fascinating questions. What I'd like to say to anyone who's considering introducing a culture of agile change in their organization is the best thing that you can do is just to get started, because agile culture it sort of reinforces itself. So as the people you work with see value being delivered, they'll have this great sense of achievement, and that will actually spur the momentum on. And all the best to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Malini. David?
Yeah, I think thanks to the panel and the questions, some good ones in there that were great. I think my final thoughts on it is Agile and change in particular is about people. and we need to understand that everybody reacts to change differently. And I think you need to equip yourself when you're working with people with the understanding that people you will react to the change differently, and make sure you're ready for that. And make sure we don't all learn the same way, and we won't all react to change in the same way. I think that's a key thing. We need to be prepared and up to speed on how people react to the change, so you have some armaments with you to deal with it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Charlotte, closing remarks?
A fantastic show. Thank you very much to everybody. I think one of the points that I want to raise is that Agile and change and culture is for everyone in every type of circumstances, no matter where you are, how old, young, what stage you're at your career. It's for everybody. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Charlotte. And I would echo that, embrace the inner agility in all of you. I'd like to thank everybody for their brilliant questions. Thank you to our producers who've been out there putting in the questions into the chat, joining us on YouTube and on LinkedIn. Fantastic job. Very well done indeed. So I'm sure that you've been inspired, as I have, by our panel today. And if you're getting value from the content, please do leave a comment on the videos below and help spread the word, please, by liking and sharing these videos with your network. Super important. Now, coming up on Monday, the 28th of February at 8 a.m. GMT, we turn our attention to how to engage stakeholders properly. And that's an art form as well as a methodology. And on Friday, the 4th, we are 4th of March now, we're going into 2 p.m. We're going to be exploring the key skill of how to actually design, develop, and build better business cases, something which is at the heart of many a successful career, being able to do that, craft those business cases together. And then later on, actually on the 7th of March, we're going to be looking at, if you're mid-career as a project manager, how do you actually build, from the kind of entry level upwards and manage your career up? Subscribe to the show and we'll send you a personal summary of what's coming up and how you too can join us here on the panel and level up your career with APMG. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next show. Bye-bye now.